We cannot eat today the wheat or potatoes of tomorrow, nor could we wear coats before they are made. What is alleged can only be true in the case the capital or other wealth of the country is diminishing, whereas during our late Civil War it increased. What really happened was this: we as a nation became indebted to some extent to foreigners, and within the nation some of us gained, while the rest of us were losing. Bonds do not represent a present consumption of a true wealth, but a consumption of existing wealth for which a government agrees to remunerate. Its owners in the future. If war could be carried on with the aid of bonds, leaving out of consideration what foreigners send us, with a sufficiently perfect taxing machinery conceivably, always and practically sometimes could be carried on without bonds. It is only a question of how to get a hold of existing wealth. War was formerly carried on without bonds because they are comparatively recent contrivance. Consumption can never anticipate future production. It can only anticipate future ownership. Introductory summary: consumption is the correlate of production, the change of goods into things through the satisfaction of wants. Consumption is to be distinguished from destruction, which changes goods into things with a partial or complete failure to satisfy wants. Consumption is not to be restricted to the satisfaction of morally justifiable wants. Consumption is either productive or final according as it results in the production of more goods in the satisfaction of wants. There is no such thing as present consumption of future goods, though future ownerships may be anticipated in consumption. Questions. Define consumption. What is the difference between consumption and production? Between consumption and destruction? What is the difference between using things and using them up? Is the question involved in consumption? And if so, how? What is the relation of consumption to the problem of good and bad wants? Define production and final consumption. What is meant by the present consumption of future goods? Literature. Theory of dynamic economics, the consumption of wealth, premises of political economy, and numerous articles in monographs. Political economy, English translation. Consumption and saving. What has been said in no way invalidates, but rather emphasizes the importance of saving in connection with consumption. To be sure, we save only in order that we may have more to consume. Saving as a mere end in itself is penuriousness, a most degrading and demoralizing passion, but the efforts of a man to produce goods are so inefficient unless he is aided by capital, which is impossible without previous saving, that he who does not save consumes his seed corn, which in his hope of next year's harvest. It is difficult to say at what point consumption should stop and saving begin. The rule will vary for individual nations. Undoubtedly, both persons and peoples have erred on either side at various times, now living in squalor to accumulate wealth. Now spending their substance in riotous living until there is a famine in the land. There is not much to choose between these two vices. They both amount to the same thing in the long run, namely, a low average consumption and reprehensible poverty of life. Difficult as it is in practice to settle this question, the principle itself is very clear. So much and only so much should be saved as will maintain a maximum final consumption over long periods of time. Inducements to saving. We have seen that men in general prefer a future good to present, only when it is larger in amount to provide for old age or for possible accidents may be a sufficient motive for saving in some cases, but most men will not save unless the goods saved will bring an increase. It is therefore necessary to extensive that the conditions of profitable investment should be provided, and if wealth is to be widely diffused, opportunities for investment must be readily accessible. It is a perceived opportunity to make an investment with probability of increase which stimulates saving above everything else. Such an opportunity is often the beginning of an individual accumulation. Some of these conditions we have now to consider. They may be grouped under two heads: security and productiveness. If the investments of a country produce well on an average, but fluctuate between loss of principal on one hand and unreasonable profit on the other, the condition is one to encourage speculation rather than saving. On the other hand, general security of investment will promote saving with a very low profit, and of course increasingly as profit increases. Among the institutions to be considered are private property. The abuse of the system of private property by those who use it selfishly and oppressively is so common that if we look only at that side, we may be tempted to conclude that it should be abolished. But over against the abuse, we may be set the advantages of the system, of which the foremost is the encouragement it gives to saving. Stock companies. These are but an extension of the principle of division of labor. How much better it is for each man to do the thing he can best, to leave in other functions to others, is clear in connection with labor. Our experience has made it clear in connection with management as well. How few men know how or could ever learn how to manage a railway. On the other hand, there are multitudes who could contribute to these two powers: the power of saved up wealth and the power of exponential ability in management. Few institutions of our day offer greater possibilities in the way of encouraging saving than these companies. It must be said, however, that these possibilities have as yet been only imperfectly realized. These investments have in general been profitable, but the speculative nature of management, the security of such investments, has been almost destroyed. So severe indictment can be brought against the stock gambling of our day. That the fact that it destroyed one of the most efficient incentives which society possesses for the general saving of wealth. Who would dare advise a poor widow to invest her savings in railway securities? Yet no property in this country is more evenly or certainly productive than any of our railways. The difficulty is due to lax sentiment and lax legislation affecting all stock companies alike, which permits a kind of management little superior to piracy. Such robbery does not simply steal the golden egg, it kills the hen that lays it. Savings banks, these have a noteworthy influence upon saving, especially among the poor. It is here especially that encouragement to saving is needed. The rich who least need to save are most apt to do so, not simply because they have most to save from, but because they have the most inducement to do so. To the poor, on the other hand, as we all know, and are overfond of asserting, are poor in large part because they are thriftless, with weak wills and clamorous, unspent. Once they know poorly how to keep money in the house unspent, so flush, quote, times bring reckless expenditure, and hard times bring distress. Savings banks, especially in Europe, have done so much to promote thrift among the poor. Insurance, this relatively modern institution, is already one of the most valuable factors in our economic civilization. It has the great merit of providing in varying proportions for both security and profit of investment. The provision for security is especially prominent in the case of the fire insurance. It is often said that much of insurance is simply an equalization of losses or a distribution of heavy sudden loss over a long period of time. In fact, it is much more than that. It is important to take the amount of a loss from a business in such amounts and at such times that no vital want is left unsatisfied, and this is done by insurance. Thus, perpetuity and equality of conditions is guaranteed to a business in such a way that as to greatly encourage investment. Same time, principle applies to life insurance. The death of a businessman is often more serious than shock to a business than a conflagration. The payment of a life insurance policy is often a great relief to the financial embarrassments in which such a business is left, but the addition of the endowment feature by which a policy becomes payable at the end of a stated period greatly adds to the other feature of life insurance, namely the profit of investment. An able businessman who devotes his time to the management of his investments will find in the low rate of interest guaranteed a small inducement, and will probably insure simply to guard against risk. But there are multitudes who are not able businessmen, professional men, and others who do not spend their time in making the management investments. To such it is easy to save an amount of year's premium. It is difficult or impossible to invest that small amount profitably, or to avoid spending it during the long period of years. The insurance company collects these myriad trifles, and by the employment of the able investors profitably invests them. We can scarcely overestimate the importance of society, of an institution which equalizes the shocks and multitudes the incentives to thrift. The wholesome economic activity, some idea of the magnitude of the insurance business may be obtained from the fact that there were in 1887 in the United States 532 life insurance companies with 5,383,100,050 policies in force, 630,913,768 gross assets, and insuring lives to the amount of 7,506,027,211 or nearly 13 times our interest-bearing national debt. This must be remembered. Includes only a single branch of the complex insurance business. Cooperation in all its forms is as an incentive not to only industry and good work, but also to saving the principal difficulty with it, that it requires some saving before it can be started. Once in operation, its incentives are increasingly felt and appreciated. Nothing is so necessary to the development of thrift as a flexible element. Publications of the American Statistical Association, Volume 1, page 146. Flexible element in a man's income varying with thrift. Perhaps cooperation, better than any other agency, makes a man feel the immediate results of saving. This is especially true when the necessary capital is in the form of stock, which could be owned in a large or small amounts. According to savings invested, cooperative stores have been especially successful in England, and while cooperation has been found more difficult in productive industries, there are numerous examples of its successful applications. Governments and capital formation. It is to be noticed that governments are more or less prominent in capital formation. When our federal government pays off the national debt, it forms capital. This means to pay off the debt are collected in small sums from millions of people who would not have used them for purposes of production, and then the aggregate is handed over to the owner of a written obligation, a bond, who uses them as capital. These means in the pockets of the people were not capital, and only a small proportion would not have been turned into capital. There can be no doubt that debt payment by the United States has increased the actual capital of the country. A part of this new capital is true, simply restored capital that has once existed and had been sacrificed years before. Similarly, when the United States expends its revenues for the post office and the other federal buildings and for wise internal improvements, it increases capital. It is a consumption which is at the same time a capital formation. When municipalities establish gas works, electric lighting works, and pay for them by taxes or by loans rapid by taxation, the capital of the country is increased. The people save a portion of their income through the agency of government, and it is the only way a large proportion of them can ever be made to save anything. Summary: consumption and saving. Saving should be proportioned to final consumption as to maintain a maximum final consumption over long periods of time. The inducements to saving are primarily security and productiveness of property. Stock companies combine managing ability and saving ability, which are not naturally united to a large extent. This system has offered the inducement of productiveness, but has destroyed that of security through speculative management. Savings banks greatly increase saving among the poor. Insurance offers both inducements in a high degree, and it is a great modern capital creator. Cooperation is highly productive of incentives to saving. Through taxation and wise investment, government contributes largely to the formation of capital. Questions: is saving always a virtue? If not, what are the limits? What is the difference between saving and penuriousness? What is two inducements are necessary to saving? What are advantages of stock companies? Their disadvantages. Are disadvantages inherent? What are the advantages and disadvantages of private property as regards savings? Note both sides. What is the effect of saving banks upon saving? Why does insurance promote saving? What is the advantage of equalizing losses? Is life insurance a good investment, and why? What is the effect of cooperation and capital sharing upon saving? Are we always out of pocket as a result of government expenditure?